Bienvenue de nouveau à la réunion.
Welcome back to the meeting number 100?
Okay.
103 of the Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage. We are resuming Tuesday's meeting, which was suspended. I will note that this meeting is taking place on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. Today's meeting will take place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders. MPs may participate either in person or through Zoom.
Meeting today, and we are going to, because we are suspended, I can do the housekeeping, do not take pictures of the meeting, etc., because and please wear a mask if you can, even though it's not required. It is a health issue that you should consider. Don't forget to direct your questions or your discussion to the chair, and you cannot speak until I recognize you. And I think that's it. But we're now starting off where we left off at the last meeting. We have an amendment that we were considering from Mr. Talib Nur Mohammed from the Liberals. So would you like to speak and move your amendment? Everyone has it now. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. And everyone has read it, so unless folks would like me to read it, look, one of the things, what Mr. Champoux put forward, I think, was an excellent starting point. The minor modifications that we've made to it are really to ensure that it is those that know the space best that are the ones that are convening the group. It's those that know the space best that are the ones that are ultimately driving it, and not government in that sense, but that we ensure that levels of government are invited to engage and participate in the conversation. And so, my hope is that this is something that we can all agree on, because it's something that we've all expressed a desire to be able to do, and that with those minor modifications, if we can bring this forward, I think it'll advance the work that we all need to do as a group, and it can meet all of our objectives and interests on the subject. That's really all I wanted to say on it.
Thank you. Ms. Thomas?
Thank you. I think that the members' adjustments to this motion are probably well-meaning, but I'll just point out what this does. So it says that the national news sector, so it says that the committee undertake a study to determine the appropriateness of the national news sector to hold a national forum. So in other words, the committee will determine if it would be appropriate for stakeholders within the national news sector to hold a forum to discuss their challenges and overcome them. Why would it be up to the committee to determine whether or not it's appropriate for stakeholders to host that forum? That's not ours to dictate. We don't get to determine whether or not that would be appropriate. If they want to do that, they can do that. So it totally changes this motion entirely, because it is putting the power in our hands to determine the appropriateness of the national news sector.
Point of order, Madam Chair. The original motion said that the committee undertake a study to determine the appropriateness of the national news sector.
No.
Sorry, or am I wrong? Maybe I'm wrong.
Undertake a study to determine the appropriateness of a national forum on the media.
Sorry, yeah, but the point is that it was always the committee that would undertake the study to determine the appropriateness.
I think I would like to say that as this reads, it is committee deciding whether it's appropriate for the national news sector to hold a forum. And so there's a grammatical change that may need to be made to make make sense. And that's all I'm suggesting. I'm not suggesting that it is necessarily out of order, but actually grammatically it doesn't make sense, because this committee does not have the ability, as Ms. Thomas said, to decide what anybody does in Canada in terms of their sectors. But that's how it reads. So if you have a grammatical change, Mr. Nur Mohammed, can you consider it? I now, after Ms. Thomas, have you finished?
No, I was
Go ahead.
interrupted. Thank you. So I just would raise that to the committee's attention. I don't know that it was the intent of the mover, but that is in fact how it reads now. And I don't believe that it's appropriate for this committee to determine whether or not it would be appropriate for stakeholders within the national news sector to hold a forum to talk about their own challenges and resolve their own issues. I think that's their determination. Now, should this committee wish to be involved at a governmental level and engage in that conversation with stakeholders, that would be a more appropriate motion.
Mr. Champeau?
Je trouve ça très intéressant ce que Mme Thomas vient de dire. Effectivement.
I find this very interesting. I'd like to talk a little bit about what the motion was meant to do initially. I don't think that the government should undertake a study. It should be the parliamentarians carrying out this debate. But we need a green light to launch the study. That's what the initial motion was for, to suggest that we set up a process of reflection and a national forum on the state of the news sector. I had presumed that in committee we would decide to entrust this task to the sector with perhaps a framework, not a discussion framework or anything like that, but just necessary support so that they might carry out this forum independently. I believe that it's the sector's job to examine itself and determine what challenges it is facing. I think we know about the challenges, but what should be done to address the challenges of the present and the future? I think Mr. Noor Mohammed's amendment was appealing. It sort of is one step ahead of my motion, and it seems like the right path to follow. Because, again, it should be the sector itself getting together and self-evaluating, if you will. I have nothing against more clarifications, but I also think that these clarifications could be made during the study of the appropriateness. This short study that the committee would carry out. During that study, we could figure out the rest. That's why I'm willing to accept the amendment. If we want to move forward, we could do that quickly. And over the 4 meetings that will be set aside during the study, we will be able to determine, as Ms. Thomas wishes, how the people in the news sector would carry out the forum, how they might organize themselves with any needed support from the government and parliamentarians. But of course, if they can do it completely independently, even better.
Thank you. Mr. Waugh. To the
Thank you.
amendment, please.
Yes, to the amendment. And thank you, Madam Chair, for pointing out the issue here, along with Ms. Thomas. You know, a lot of us have been around this table for many years. We've seen many news agencies come, both newspaper, not as much radio, and certainly a lot TV. A lot of them don't get along with one another, to be quite frank with you, especially in the TV industry. So, you know, I've been around here a long time. I'm not sure I can support this. I've heard these news agencies here for the last 8 years come and cry and say this and that. And it's interesting because when I look at Bell Media and others, and then they own Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment, and they open their wallet and they could have the best baseball player in the world signed this week, and it'll be interesting how they'll spin that on their media platforms. So I've heard enough from the media organizations. If they want to do this, they can get together. But I know that, especially in the television end of it, there is no love lost between CTV and the CBC. There is no love lost between French television and the CBC. There is no love lost between Global, Chorus, and CTV and CBC. So if they wish to get together, which they probably would in Palm Springs or Florida, because that's where all the owners end up, they may do so on their own accord.
Thank you, Mr. Waugh. I now go to Mr. Noor Mohammed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I find it remarkable that those that talk about not wanting government to have overreach and that government should not decide how the private sector governs its functions to now say that it should be government and parliament that decides what is appropriate for the media and that the committee then determine its terms of reference. I mean, it is, I think Mr. Champous's comments are absolutely important. If you think about this in the context of what we are trying to accomplish here.
Point of order.
If we have...
Sorry, Ms. Thomas, yes?
Thank you. I would just point out, we were simply speaking about the amendment that was made. It was actually the Liberals that moved that amendment that this committee would determine the appropriateness.
No.
We actually believe that government should stay out of it.
That's debate.
That's well, but the order, the point that was made is that I may be ruling this amendment inappropriate because it doesn't make sense. It is
Madam Chair,
beyond the authority. May I finish, please, Mr. Noor Mohammed? It is beyond the authority of a standing committee of the House of Commons to tell a sector how it's going to behave. That's how this reads grammatically. That's what Ms. Thomas is saying. It's not the intent of the motion. It's the way it was phrased, and it needs to be edited in some way. This is what people are saying. It's not about the intent, but it's about how it reads. Grammatically, it reads that this committee should decide whether it's appropriate for the national news sector to hold a forum. It is not up to us to decide that. We cannot decide that.
So, in this committee, I'm trying to figure out how it is that we cannot, as a committee, even that we have the ability to study whatever we would like that is within the mandate of the Department of Canadian Heritage and all of the things related, all those matters related, how we could not in this group amongst us have a conversation, engage with stakeholders to actually think about having a national forum on the media that is led by the sector. We should not be leading that conversation. The sector should be, we should be empowering them, working with them, but the sector should be leading that conversation. And the committee should be inviting folks to have this conversation. If there is a grammatical tweak, I am happy to look at what a grammatical tweak would look like. But I think there is an important distinction here between the committee determining the appropriateness of the news sector doing something and having the sector tell us what they think. And I think Mr. Champous's comments are bang on. So I am open to kind of working with others if we agree on the spirit of what we're trying to do, if there is a grammatical or linguistic shift that will get us to the same outcome. But, you know, I perhaps I'm too close to it, so I can't see that. But I welcome comments from others that have constructive feedback on how we can improve that.
Sur ce rappel au règlement, Madame la Présidente.
Excuse me, as a chair, I suggest
On a point of order, Madam Chair.
a grammatical tweak. It is about what this motion actually says. I know it's not what the member intends for it to say. So can you just fix it so that it says what you want it to say, please? That's all we're saying. Yes. Now,
Sur le rappel au
Mr.
règlement.
Julian.
C'était
Sorry.
sur
With a point of order, Madam Chair. Just to address the question of forcing the sector to do something. No, we cannot force the sector to do something. A few years ago, a report came out, the Yale report, on the future of broadcasting. And someone requested that report. I don't think Ms. Yale decided to just set up a commission by herself and write a nice report about the future of broadcasting. Often, people ask reports to be written, and then it's industry who's entrusted to write the report. That's what we're calling for. We would ask for a study to be conducted, and then it would be the sector in doing that. That's what I want to talk about. If Mr. Noor Mohammed's amendment could reflect this principle, then I'm sure we could come to an agreement quickly.
It's what we are trying to get at, Mr. Shampoo, that Mr. Noor Mohammed's language reflects what he's trying to say. At the moment, it doesn't. I cannot say it's appropriate for us to tell a sector what they can or cannot do. And that's what this amendment is saying. So, Mr. Julian, and then Ms. Hefner.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. D'abord, j'appuie l'idée.
First, I would like to say I support the idea of the federal government supporting the possibility of a national forum on news and the news sector across the country. I think that's very important, especially since media is in a state of crisis right now. We know with the TVA budget cuts and the very recent unfortunate Radio-Canada cuts. I know we'll have the opportunity to talk about this later, but we'll definitely need the head of CBC Radio-Canada to come before the committee to talk about that situation with about how they're giving out bonuses at the same time as they're laying people off. But overall, as a committee, it would be our responsibility to advise the government about whether they should support such an initiative.
It's not having a study to determine the appropriateness of the national news sector doing that. It's really, and this is the sub-amendment that I'm going to offer, it's on the appropriateness of the government providing support to the national news sector to hold that national news forum. If they choose to do that, it will take support from the federal government. We're talking about a sector that's in crisis. I certainly understand Mr. Waugh's comments about some of the corporations that own some of the media doing very, very well and choosing not to invest in the news sector. But the reality is this is not going to happen unless the federal government says this is important enough to support. So I would like to offer as a sub-amendment the appropriateness after the word of the government providing support to the national news sector. So adding the words the government providing support to, between the appropriateness of and the national news sector as a sub-amendment, which I think falls within our framework. It allows us to look at the appropriate ways that the government could be providing support if the national news sector chooses to do that, as well as encouraging the national news sector to hold that national forum. And particularly when I think of my community, the Burnaby Beacon, the Burnaby Now, New Westminster Anchor, the Royal City Record, they are all struggling. The fact that we continue to subsidize Meta and Google over $1 billion a year and aren't providing supports to those local fact-based journalists that do such a terrific job is something that needs to be considered as part of that. So that's certainly the framework that I think is appropriate for this committee. So again, the sub-amendment would read, after appropriateness of, the government providing support to the national news sector.
Thank you. I'm going to read out what we're going to be discussing now. Mr. Shampoo, let me read it into the record first. That pursuant to Standing Order 108.2, the committee undertake a study to determine the appropriateness of the government providing support to the national news sector to hold a national forum on the media, and that the committee invites sector experts and leaders, et cetera, et cetera. You've got the rest of the motion in front of you. So that's what the sub-amendment reads, and I think the sub-amendment actually makes sense, and so I'm going to ask you to speak to the sub-amendment now. So we have, speaking to the sub-amendment, Mr. Shampoo, Ms. Thomas, Ms. Hepner. Oh, the sub-amendment, Mr. Waugh. Sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Support, what does that look like? That's a big word. Does it mean that the government support in financial or direction? So I do have some issues with this, as you heard me before. But when I read government provides support, does that mean we have support here around the table to hold a national news sector, to bring them in and talk to them, or is it financial support? So I just want clarification.
All right. Clarification is being sought by Mr. Waugh. Then we have Mr. Shampoo.
Là-dessus, quand on parle de la...
On that note, since we're talking about appropriateness, it seems like that should be part of the discussion. It's not saying we believe the government should provide funding to this examination. In the motion, as I understand Mr. Julian's sub-amendment, we would be discussing the relevance of the government simply supporting the national forum held by the news sector. I think it's an acceptable compromise. I think it largely clarifies the intent of the amendment, and I believe that we could move forward with that sub-amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Noor Mohammed.
Yeah, thank you to both Mr. Julien and Mr. Champoux. I think what Mr. Julien has suggested makes perfect sense. I think it captures the spirit of what we're trying to accomplish. I think it accomplishes what Mr. Champoux wanted to do, and I think it satisfies what I was trying to do, but clearly the language of it was a bit clumsy. So I think it's a great compromise, and I think we'd be glad to support it.
So I'm going to anyone else wishing to speak to the sub-amendment. If not, I'm going to call a vote on the sub-amendment. Please. Go ahead and call the vote. I think we should read it out. Thank you.
So the vote is on the sub-amendment.
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Coteau.
In favor.
Ms. Dillon.
Yes.
Ms. Hefner. Mr. Noor Mohammed.
Yes.
Mr. Mendicino.
Yes.
Mr. Waugh.
No.
Mrs. Thomas.
No.
Mr. Shields.
No.
Ms. Goodridge.
No.
Mr. Champoux.
En faveur.
Mr. Julien.
Oui, bien sûr.
Yeas pour 7, nays contre 4, 4.
So the motion is, the sub-amendment is carried. And so now I'm going to ask you to vote on the amended amendment, as amended by the sub-amendment, which is going to be the new motion now. So, Mr. Shields, yeah?
It's still open for debate on the original motion, the
Yes,
amended
yes,
motion. Okay,
yes.
thank you.
Yes. So we're now going to move the amendment. Sub-amendment is carried. We're now going to vote on the main motion as amended. Thank you.
Which I'd like
So
to speak
any
to.
debate on this? Pardon?
Yes.
So it's debate on the amendment.
On the what?
On the amendment.
Okay, debate on the amendment, because I think I understood that Mr. Noor Mohammed removed his amendment and is accepting the sub-amendment. Okay, let's move the debate on the amendment as amended.
Right.
Please, those, we're going to call a vote on it, or you want to vote on the amendment as amended?
No, I want to speak.
All right, go ahead, Mr. Shields.
Thank you, Chair. So, for clarification, we added the words in, but the rest of the amendment as presented is still there, right? So the rest of the wording is still there, right? So here's the challenge I've got. Provided this sector initiates a forum, the government as the national and provincial levels. I have a real problem with provincial being in there. That's not ours. I object to the word provincial being in there. It's not our business.
All right, Mr. Champoux, and then Mr. Waugh. And then Mr. Noor Mohammed, is your hand up? Thank you.
Madame la Présidente, je trouve ça très intéressant.
Madam Chair, I find Mr. Shields' comments interesting on when he spoke about the reference to other levels of government, including the provincial level of government. I actually had a discussion about this with Mr. Waugh while we were waiting for the committee to start this morning. He also spoke about his concerns about involving the provincial governments. Well, first, we're not forcing anyone to do anything. We're simply inviting provincial governments to the table. And the Quebec government has made a specific request to be consulted. So that is a current request by the Quebec government to be invited to the table. The Quebec government is actually in the process of setting up a media fund, so they've urged us to invite them. As such, I think that in the current context, it would be relevant to include a reference to other levels of government if they're interested in participating in the discussion. I would also like to note that even municipal governments, which may want to participate, might be invited, because media coverage in rural areas is going through a crisis right now, and municipalities are closest to the ground. They would be well placed to speak on that issue. So I don't think it's inappropriate to reference other levels of government and offer them an invitation to come offer their point of view during the forum.
Thank you, Mr. Shampoo, and Mr. Waugh, and then Mr. Nur Mohammed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As Mr. Shampoo mentioned, we did have a discussion prior to today's meeting, and he filled me in on the province of Quebec. It's interesting when you start to bring in provincial governments. You know, Mr. Julian, your newspapers that you just talked about are in crisis, probably because the NDP provincial government is not putting any resources.
Point of order. Point of order.
Sorry, I don't know who is asking for a point of order at the moment. Yes, Mr. Julian, point of order.
I would like Mr. Waugh, who I have enormous respect for it, number one, to stick to the topic, but number two, to be fact-based in what he is speaking about. We're talking about fact-based journalism. He's got to stay with facts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Julian. Mr. Waugh, you finished your...
No, I was just going to say, you know, it's just interesting when we talk about governments at the national and provincial levels. They're the ones that have caused a lot of the crisis in local newspapers. They pulled every ad they can in rural Canada, and now the crisis has hit, and now some of the MPs around this table have really realized it. Oh, the federal government is putting so much money into Meta and Google and so on, and less into local newspapers. We've been saying that, Madam Chair, around this table, particularly conservative MPs, dealing with Bill C-18. The local newspapers are the ones that are disappearing faster than any other. That's all I have to say. And now finally everyone else has realized it.
Thank you, Mr. Waugh. Nur Mohammed, Mr. Nur Mohammed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, the addition of inviting the provincial governments to this, I think, reflects the aspirations Mr. Shampoo talked about. But for me, it also spoke to some of the concerns that Mr. Shields had spoken about the local media in his community and the challenges that could only be presented perhaps by provincial governments that are perhaps closer to some of these issues at the provincial level than we might be. But again, it's an invitation, and they are welcome not to participate if they choose not to. But as a gesture, as an important gesture to involve and to increase the scope of the conversation, lest anyone assume it is dominated by, you know, the expression that our friends across like to use of Laurentian elites, this gives everybody a chance to be at the table and to be part of the conversation if they choose. And if they choose not to, that's okay.
I now ask Mr. Shields to speak. Thank you.
Then if the author of the motion had said invite all levels of government, it might have made sense. But it doesn't.
Mr. Nur Mohammed, yes.
I appreciate Mr. Shields' comments. There have been opportunities to provide amendments, but we are where we are, and this is, you know.
Amended by Mr. Julian. So let's stick to that at the moment. There seems to be no sub-amendment coming up to change the language as it's written. So unless anyone else has any further discussion, I'm going to call the question on the sub-amendment, the amended amendment. Thank you. Ms. Clerk, please, go ahead.
The vote is on the amendment as amended. Mr. Coteau.
In favor?
Madame Dillon.
Yes.
Ms. Hepler.
En faveur.
Mr. Nur Mohammed.
Yes.
Mr. Mendicino.
Yes.
Mr. Waugh.
No.
Mrs. Thomas.
No.
Mr. Shields.
No.
Ms. Goodridge.
No.
Mr. Shampoo.
Ooh.
Mr. Julian.
Oui, bien sûr.
7 yeas, 4 nays.
Thank you. So the amended amendment now passes. So now we go to the amended motion of Mr. Shampoo. Any discussion on that, please? And if you wish, I will read the amended motion of Mr. Shampoo, but you should all have it in front of you. I read it into the record the last time around, but I can read it again if you wish it to be on the record. No? We're good? All right. So I'd like us to vote now on the amended motion of Mr. Shampoo. So any debate, any discussion? Then let's call the vote, please.
vote on the motion as amended. Mr. Coteau. Ms. Dillon.
Yes.
Ms. Hefner.
En faveur.
Mr. Noor Mohammed. Mr. Mendicino.
Yes.
Mr. Waugh.
No.
Mrs. Thomas.
No.
Mr. Shields.
No.
Ms. Goodrich.
No.
Monsieur Champoux.
En faveur.
Mr. Julian.
Oui, bien sûr.
You're considering it.
7 yeas, 7 pour, 4 nays, 4 contre.
Thank you. The motion as amended is passed. And so now I think we need to move on to the orders of the day, which I think would be meeting with witnesses. So I would ask that we suspend while we get into that second part of the meeting. Thank you. And get the witnesses moved on board. Thank you very much. Mr. Champoux, you're looking confused. You're cool? You're good with it? Okay, great. Thanks. All the witnesses have been checked. Where are the witness list? And so we have We have witnesses to speak to the study on the tech giants' current and ongoing use of intimidation and subversion tactics to evade regulation in Canada and across the world. Now, today we have the American Economic Liberties Project, Dr. Eric Peinert, research manager. We have the Free Press, Nora Benavidez, senior counsel and director of Digital Justice and Civil Rights, and we have the Hub, Sean Spear, editor at large. So we have three witnesses. They have been duly sound checked and are ready to speak. And I will begin then with, for 5 minutes, Dr. Peinert. You have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, bonjour. My name is Eric Peinert. I am the research manager at the American Economic Liberties Project, a Washington, D.C.-based policy and advocacy organization focused on reducing concentrated economic power to broaden opportunity for small businesses, workers, and communities. I earned a PhD from Brown University, where my research focused on competition, monopoly, and antitrust, and has been published in leading academic journals. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today about big tech's pattern of coercion in response to regulation, and specifically Meta's recent action to block Canadian access to news articles across its platform in retaliation for the passage of C-18, the Online News Act. This follows a nearly identical action in 2021 by Meta, then Facebook, to extract concessions from Australia with respect to its news media bargaining code. This discussion comes at a time when the news industry across the globe is in peril. It's an industry I've closely watched since I was a child. I was raised by a journalist. My mother began her career as a reporter for a local paper in rural New England in the late 1970s, moving to various editorial roles in minor cities, to the newsroom at the Boston Globe, and then to executive positions at the Boston Globe and Gatehouse Media, now Gannett, and now owns several successful independent local papers in Massachusetts suburbs. My personal and professional experiences lead me to make two principal points today. The first being about the platform's business model in this market. Media companies pay to produce and just distribute content that a large mass of readers find valuable, and then sell ads to businesses that want their offerings in front of those readers. On one side, Meta and Google have become a central way that readers access news media, giving them power over journalism outlets with an implicit threat to cut off readership. On the other side, Meta and Google also have an effective duopoly over digital advertising, and both face or faced antitrust lawsuits for illegal monopolization in this space. These companies are not providing viewership so much as using their dual control over internet traffic and advertising to monetize content that journalists produce at considerable expense. Recent research by economists at the University of Zurich indicates that 40% of Google's total revenue from search advertising would go to publishers and other journalism outlets if it faced more competition. With media companies paying to produce the content and big tech getting the ad revenue, this destroys the model of journalism that a democracy needs. Google's decision to broker a deal with the Canadian government last week to pay about 100 million Canadian dollars per year to journalism outlets and publishers simply confirms this. It acknowledged the value the platforms gained from journalism. The dispute was over the scale of payments and the terms of negotiation, whether to have one deal or require multiple bargaining units, rather than whether the compensation was owed at all. This brings me to my second point, why these companies respond to regulatory proposals with bullying, threats, and coercion. Rather than making rational business decisions in response to regulatory changes, as Meta claims it is acting with respect to Bill C-18, they see oversight and market governance as an existential threat to their predatory business models and react with hostility. For example, these tech giants have been leveraging trade and investment frameworks to stop governments around the world from regulating them. Their latest strategy is pressuring governments to include digital trade clauses into bilateral and multilateral trade agreements. In this way, big tech companies are better positioned to argue that policies like the Online News Act are violations of trade law because they unfairly discriminate against companies like Google and Meta by virtue of their American origin, ignoring that these companies are targeted due to their size and not their place of incorporation. This is also even though, as American multinational companies, their home country is considering many of the same and similar policies, with the Journalism Competition and Preservation Act repeatedly introduced into the American Congress. They succeeded, to a degree, by getting the North American governments to include expansive digital trade clauses into the 2020 CUSMA. U.S. industry associations are already making use of this language to claim that the Online News Act violates Canada's commitments under the CUSMA. Or, more egregiously, Meta last week filed a lawsuit against the American Federal Trade Commission, one of its primary regulators, arguing that the commission itself is unconstitutional and thus effectively illegal as a regulator, rather than face an amended consent decree based on privacy violations the company has repeatedly committed over the past decade. in which the FTC has found involve children's data. Adding little of clear social value, but having learned to profit from it nonetheless, Meta repeatedly shows disdain for the rule of law in this space, preferring to destroy the legal system in the United States and elsewhere, rather than come up with a business model that is both profitable and socially beneficial. Having seen the continuously worsening struggles of the news industry over the course of my life, I applaud the Canadian government for passing the Online News Act, and we hope to see similar policies passed in the United States. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you very much. That was really great. It was absolutely on time. You had 20 seconds left. Thank you very much. Now I would like to go to the Free Press, Ms. Benavides, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm Nora Benavides, Senior Counsel at Free Press, not the Free Press, which is a different entity, just wanting to clarify. We are a US-based NGO where I run public accountability campaigns and federal policy reform efforts to ensure that tech is protecting human and civil rights and upholding democracy. Following years of work by civil society, academics, and lawmakers documenting social media harms and urging more accountability, the largest tech companies have responded with disinterest. What's worse, increasingly, they have used dangerous tactics to evade accountability. And so I'll talk a little bit about that today. Since the global pandemic, other crises like the January 6th insurrection at the US Capitol, the attempted coup in Brazil in January of this year, and the current conflict in the Middle East illustrate the critical role social media platforms play in shaping rapidly unfolding events. Their failure to vet and remove content that violates their own stated terms of service harms and alienates users. Failure to moderate content inevitably also leads to the migration of lies and toxicity from online platforms to mainstream media. Just today, our organization, Free Press, released new research on the backsliding of big tech companies. In the last year alone, Meta, Twitter, and YouTube have weakened their political ads policies, creating room for lies in ads ahead of next year's elections around the world. They have weakened their privacy policies to give AI tools access to user data. And they've collectively laid off nearly 40,000 employees. Massive cuts have occurred across trust and safety teams, ethical engineering, responsible innovation, and content moderation. Those are the teams tasked with maintaining platforms' general health and protecting users from harm. This dangerous backslide has come under scrutiny. Evidence comes from whistleblowers, from researchers who are looking at algorithmic discrimination, and pressure also comes from organizations like ours, urging advertisers to leave Twitter because of Elon Musk's decisions that make the platform more hateful and violent. All of this points to the fact that tech companies cannot be trusted to govern themselves. Their response has been far from collaborative. There have been several new tactics that companies have adopted to shut down inquiry and accountability. First is cutting off researcher and API access to platform data. Researchers are now suffering various limitations. Facebook was removed and denied access. The NYU Ad Observatory was denied access by Facebook in 2021 to get its platform services following months of inquiry analyzing its ad library tools. Twitter has made its API tool almost impossible for researchers to access because of the high price tag. And all of the major platforms require advance notice from researchers who must be affiliated with universities to get access to their API. And then this kind of sets up a de facto process where the platforms can approve or reject research access if they don't like how the ultimate product might be used. The second major threat we are now seeing is litigation to silence researchers and critics. Elon Musk has adopted this tactic and gone after several research entities and NGOs, studying the extent to which hate persists and grows on Twitter. Musk has sued several organizations, the Center for Countering Digital Hate. I know that their CEO spoke before you as well, the state of California, and Media Matters for America. He's also threatened other organizations. These suits are dangerous to researchers, but they're also dangerous to the public, who will really be kept in the dark about tech companies' unethical practices. And then finally, the third major concern now is cross-sector attacks, abusing official power to go after researchers studying disinformation. This past summer, U.S. House Judiciary Chairman Jim Jordan led an effort demanding documents from leading academics accusing them of suppressing speech, in particular conservative speech. These attacks have absolutely led researchers to retreat from doing the necessary work they had been doing. Big tech doesn't have to go after every tech accountability researcher and campaigner because these actions are already having a chilling effect. We've witnessed in plain sight tech companies run nearly every play in the book to avoid regulation and accountability. Their platforms are undermining democracy, civil and human rights, privacy, and public safety. And so that's why I'm here today, really excited to talk with you. We have called on our US government to compel more transparency, to minimize the data that companies collect, use, and retain, to outlaw discriminatory algorithms, and to tax online advertising and redistribute those funds to support local, independent, non-commercial journalism. Thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. On time once again. Thank you very much, Ms. Benavides. And now I go to the third witness, whom I have lost, and it's the Hub. Sorry, I didn't mean to lose you, Mr. Spear. No. But it's Sean Spear of the Hub. 5 minutes, please, Mr. Spear.
Thank you, Ms. Chair, and thank you for committee members for inviting me to participate today. As the chair says, I present to you in my capacity as editor-at-large at the Hub, an online Canadian news organization that I co-founded nearly 3 years ago. We publish a combination of opinion commentary, standard news reporting, and a series of podcasts. We're philanthropically supported. Our audience size, content mix, and level of engagement are significantly growing. We view ourselves as an increasingly valuable part of the country's news media ecosystem and a major contributor to its public policy discourse. As an organization, the Hub has generally opposed government intervention in support of the news media industry. I'd like to take my time here to set out how we've come to think about what's occurring within the industry and how policymakers should respond. Journalism is clearly going through a process of transformation. Traditional business models have been disrupted by new technologies and the rise of online platforms like Google and Meta, as the other witnesses have set out. This process of creative destruction has created a lot of destruction. It's led to business rationalizations, layoffs, and even outright closures. But there's also a creative dynamic of which the Hub is a part. New and emerging players are experimenting with different business models, content forms, and relationships to their audiences in order to figure out how to create a sustainable business that's ultimately supported by markets broadly defined. Most of these entities will fail. Some will succeed. Some will cover specific subject matters. Others will target geographical areas or particular points of view. Some will operate as for-profit businesses. Others will take the form of nonprofits or even charitably funded organizations like ours. The process that I describe is complicated and uncertain, but it isn't a market failure that necessitates large-scale government intervention. It's a market correction that policymakers should, generally speaking, let play itself out. It's, of course, the same dynamic market process that's transformed other parts of our economy over time and ultimately contributed to the country's progress and prosperity. Now, one might argue that the news media is different, that it's not the same as other sectors. It plays a more crucial role in our civic and democratic life, and therefore should be treated differently. There's something to that argument. We at the Hub believe passionately about the importance of reliable news and information in our democratic society. But we shouldn't let our good intentions interfere with the process of market-led change. Doing so would effectively signal that the legacy business model is the only one capable of meeting our democratic needs. It's ahistorical and fails to reckon with the exciting innovation occurring within the industry. That said, there may be certain areas where public policy can play a role to better enable the transformation that's occurring within the market, rather than a shaping role that tries to presume which direction the market should head. One example is to increase the charitable donations tax credit for registered journalism organizations to the same level as a tax credit available to donations to political parties. It would be a logical step to recognize that both institutions, the media and political parties, have key roles to play in the functioning of our democracy. Another would be to make the subscription tax credit for qualified Canadian journalism organizations refundable and increase its generosity to higher levels. The virtue of both of these suggestions is that they would follow the choice of Canadian consumers. They would be subjected in that sense to a market test rather than the dictates of government itself. As my time comes up, if I may sum up my comments, first, it's premature to conclude that we've reached a market failure that necessitates major government intervention. Doing so would take the onus off the industry to figure out how to create sustainable journalism and impede innovation being led by independent outlets like the Hub. Second, to the extent that government opts to intervene, public policy should generally be neutral and subordinate to consumer signals. I put forward a couple of options, but there are no doubt others. Let me conclude with this point, committee members. The Hub is currently running a series that we're really excited about called The Future of News, where we're bringing different voices and perspectives, including some you've heard at the committee, to our pages to talk about how to move forward, specifically how to create the conditions for a sustainable journalism sector. I can tell you that after 3 years at the Hub, we're optimistic that entrepreneurs and markets are indeed capable of creating sustainable journalism and would encourage policymakers to minimize their interference in that process. That approach would be in the best interest of journalism, and I would argue in the best interest of our democracy. Thank you.
Much on time as well. Thank you. Now, I'm going to open this segment to questions and answers. The first question segment is going to be a 6-minute segment. That includes the question and the answer. I'd like everyone to note that. And so we begin with the Conservatives. The first questioner is Rachel Thomas. Mrs. Thomas.
Thank you. My first question here is for Mr. Speer. You said right now in the news sector, we're seeing lots of new and innovative approaches being taken, and they're largely being driven by market values. You said that this is a good thing and that government intervention is actually thwarting or distorting that innovation that's taking place. I'm curious if you can expand on that a little bit more in terms of the impact that government interventions, such as Bill C-18, have on the innovative news sector and its future.
Well, one of the challenges, MP Thomas, that new startups face in terms of building an audience, building awareness in the marketplace, of course, is finding different channels to reach that audience. And up until now, for the Hub, and I think others have testified similarly, Meta and Google have been a major part of that process. We don't see the platforms as a threat or playing a counterproductive role. They've enabled us to build and grow what are increasingly sustainable news organizations that can start to fill some of the gaps that have been created by the process of disruption that is at the heart of much of the work that the committee is doing. So one of the consequences, of course, of C-18 has been that many of us have lost the ability to communicate and reach our current audience and to grow it because the law, of course, has caused Meta to leave the Canadian market. Fortunately, the agreement between Google and the government prevented a scenario where Google similarly left the market. Had that happened, I fear that a lot of the progress we're seeing in the new and independent media sector would have been fundamentally disrupted. And so I would say, as you think about the work that the committee is doing, I would encourage you to start with the Hippocratic Oath. Do no harm, permit entrepreneurs and innovators, and of course, longstanding media organizations to go through this iterative process of trial and error to figure out how we can continue to deliver the news and information that Canadians need, reflecting, of course, the changing technological environment.
May I, excuse me, I'm going to stop this for a second. May I ask that people address their questions and answers through the chair and not directly to each other? Thank you. Go ahead.
Pardon me.
Ms. Thomas.
Okay. Thank you. Right now, under Bill C-18, or sorry, I should not say that, Google has managed to get an exemption from Bill C-18 and has offered $100 million to the news sector for in exchange for that exemption. And it is proposed by the PBO, the Parliamentary Budget Officer, that about a third of that funding is going to go to the CBC, which is already a publicly funded broadcaster to the tune of $1.4 billion, and then another $400 million in ad revenue and subscriptions. What does this do to the overall news media market and its future in this country when big tech and big government collude to give 1/3 of this money to a public broadcaster?
Well, I think I would say two things in response, Ms. Chair. First of all, we can talk about the risks to the public's trust to media organizations who, on one hand, are of course responsible for holding governments and big tech for many of the reasons outlined by the two other witnesses to account. And one can't help but think that that either in fact or in perception, their ability to carry out that accountability function will be undermined. And so I think that is something that policymakers need to take seriously, and indeed the industry does. To the broader question, though, I would say one of the biggest concerns of a model that doesn't follow consumer signals or market signals, but instead has either the government or, in this particular case, a industry association or industry interlocutor between the individual media organizations, and in this particular case, Google, is someone is ultimately going to adjudicate the distribution of those resources. And I think the fear of startup organizations like the Hub is that those resources will be disproportionately directed to legacy media companies and not the parts of the sector that are actually growing and innovating. And so I think one of the challenges, of course, is that is not an inadvertent consequence of the policy framework as it's been established. It is inherent to it, and so that's why I said in my statement that if indeed the government or the committee is of the view that action needs to be taken to support the sector, I think the preference ought to be that public funding follows, the extent possible, consumer preference or market signals to minimize the extent to which either government or, in this case, some sort of industry representative is ultimately deciding the allocation of resources.
Now, the next is the Liberals, and it's Ms. Hepner for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I will start with Mr. Peinert. Nice to see you again today. I'm glad we can hear you finally. You mentioned in your opening statement that tech giants have been able to monetize content that journalists produce at a huge expense, or something to that effect. Would you expand on that, please?
Yeah, I would expand on that on two levels. I mean, at one, I think a point to emphasize is that journalism, especially local, provincial, or in the United States context, state level, requires a fair amount of just direct labor to go out and talk to politicians, public officials, members of the community, and there's no way to technologically replace that fact. It is expensive. You need to hire journalists to do that work, and it is going to be media companies and journalism outlets that are always going to be doing that. In terms of the other side of the equation of big tech being able to monopolize this, I want to emphasize that we are not dealing with a situation of abstract market forces or price signals, but rather a group of companies that have developed and, through a series of mergers in particular, created a particular market structure where they are able to take an overwhelming majority of the income and profits. Google owns the ad management tools for both advertisers buying ads, the online advertising market, as well as the ad management tools for media companies selling ads. And likewise, in those same markets, Meta and Google have been caught bid rigging for banner ads for those exact advertising tools. We are not dealing with a technological change that just fell out of the sky. It is a market structure where they can determine who gets paid what to maximize their own profits. And Google and Meta are not, they're neither paying directly towards media companies, nor are they themselves employing journalists. They instead are using the existence of journalism, which online at this point, they have created the expectation that it's largely free, to channel traffic through their own platforms and not compensate for it.
And what I saw over more than 20 years of being a journalist is a massive shrinkage of newsrooms. So when I started in 1999, we had hundreds of journalists in a newsroom. Today, the newsrooms are virtual, and there's maybe a handful of reporters producing the content. What is the effect on our democracy and our society of having such a dearth of voices in journalism today?
I can speak broadly to that. It's very, very bad for democracy overall. I think democracy requires a free press, not just at a national level to comment on what a prime minister or president is doing or what the national legislature is doing, but local levels, regional levels, journalism in a democracy requires that you have oversight and people knowing what public officials are doing. And as we've seen over the last 20 or so years, as the number of journalists has dried up, there's simply not a reporter to go send to a public meeting to know what's going on. The public is uninformed. And there is significant research indicating that as newsrooms close, corruption in public offices increases because there's simply no oversight to stop it.
Thank you. Ms. Benavides, I would turn to you now. In some of the articles through your platform, you talk about how social media companies have abdicated all responsibility to their users. And you've said that certain demographics in particular are targeted by advertisements and discouraged from participating in voting and participating in censuses. Would you tell us more about this work that you've done and what it means to our democracy?
Sure. Thank you so much. And Chair, thank you so much for the opportunity. It's difficult to quantify how users are targeted with different content because, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, there's just so much opacity plagued by these companies, and attempts by researchers or others to glean insights are met with the various tactics I mentioned. That being said, there are some hallmarks that we've seen over the years. In particular, during election periods, we know that certain user demographics have been targeted with content that makes them afraid to engage and go to the polls. In the United States, users whose identities are Black, Latino, Native American have been targeted with very laser-like precision by major tech companies, Meta, which at the time was Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. The content that some of these users see really plays into their existing vulnerabilities, fears within communities, distrust of government. And the sort of, kernel here is it always feels credible. People see something online and they trust it. They then become fearful, and the content that they might be given will play into what their perceived vulnerabilities already are. In the 2020 election in the United States, users were given content that specifically mentioned that certain law enforcement or others might be at polling locations, and also preyed on fears of violence or intimidation.
Thank you. I have 20 seconds. Mr. Speer, quickly, you said in your remarks that the tech giants have given you a platform in order to do your work, but you also said that you're supported by philanthropy. Is that sustainable?
I think the answer is yes. We're building both large-scale philanthropy from foundations to support us, but we're also increasingly building a network of individual donors and subscribers who want to pay for our content. We think that's not only a sustainable business, it's a useful means, Ms. Chair, to ensure that our content is responsive to and reflects what audiences want. And I think that's a relationship that we don't want public policy to break.
Thank you. Now I go to the Bloc Québécois. For 6 minutes, please, Martin Champoux.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for being here today. It was really interesting to hear your opening remarks as well as your answers to my colleagues' questions. It got me thinking about what we're discussing now. How we should support the news sector. And business models have come up, and I think we all agree that the business models of traditional media, legacy media, should be reviewed. That's why I suggested a national forum so that we could re-examine current business models and let media organizations, especially news organizations, prepare themselves for current and future challenges. And so I agree with that. I think everyone would agree with that. We should provide tools to the sector and so that it can adapt, and let them develop their own tools so that they can adapt to this digital shift, which they have not been able to undergo completely. Many businesses are shifting towards a model that better addresses digital realities, but this transition is not complete. However, what has fallen through the cracks here is the user angle, the consumer angle. We talk about support to newsrooms and media companies, and we talk about business models. Mr. Spear, I really thought it was interesting when you talked about tax rebates for news subscribers. I am in support of innovative ideas like that will let newsrooms flourish and do their work and not be taxed unduly. But for news consumers, there's all sorts of different news consumers. People of different ages consume news differently. Someone over age 55 may have gotten much of their news from TV and radio. Meanwhile, younger people might get their news more from the radio. But when you look at demographics, what we observe is that older people typically consume a lot of written news that is printed in newspapers. And a lot of these people don't even have technology to go access news on apps or online. And we can't very well force these people to procure technology or learn how to use it. So, at the same time, we should start thinking about these people who need us to continue providing information in legacy formats. There's all sorts of newspapers throughout Quebec and Canada. My colleague, Mr. Shields, spoke about the 20 local newspapers in his riding, which are in trouble because the support they provide is poorly designed or not adapted to current realities. Now, I'm going to ask my question to Mr. Spear, because I get the sense that we all know where we're heading, but is there a way to smooth the transition somewhat? We do need to support newsrooms who provide information to people who still resort to newspapers to get their news. And sure, eventually we want to transition government support towards new business models that will better respond to the current needs and the needs of the younger generation. I'm not sure if I've been clear, but I'd like to hear you speak about this, Mr. Spear.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. I would say, though, respectfully, I think we precisely don't know where we're going, which is why government should be cautious about intervening in the market in favor of one particular format or one particular content format or one particular business model or one particular approach to journalism. This process is uncertain. I couldn't begin to tell you what future sustainable journalistic business models look like. I think everyone from the Globe and Mail to the Hub and virtually everyone in between is trying to figure that out through a combination of subscribers, in our particular, sometimes venture capital, in our particular case, philanthropy. But I ultimately have more confidence, I think, in markets. If there's a critical mass of Canadians who want their news produced and provided to them in a traditional physical newspaper, then I have confidence that entrepreneurs of some sort are going to seize that market opportunity. And so I guess that's a long way of saying, Ms. Chair, that precisely
30 seconds.
because this process is creative and uncertain, I would caution policymakers not to intervene and preclude it from playing itself out.
Merci. Il me reste peut-être 20 secondes. Je vais probablement conclure avec.
Thank you. There's 20 seconds left, so I'm just going to conclude on a personal note. I understand what you're saying. The issue is that entrepreneurs are aware that traditional business models don't work anymore because of the involvement of web giants. We still need to provide services to the population. So in my view, even if current business models are no longer profitable, investors are not going to want to invest in something that is on its way out. We still need to support current business models. I'm going to stop now, but thank you for your remarks, Mr. Spear.
Mr. Julian, for the New Democratic Party, please. 6 minutes, Peter.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'd like to thank our witnesses. Very important testimony that you're providing with us this morning. I do want to note very clearly that the government already interferes massively in the marketplace, giving over $1 billion in indirect subsidies each and every year to Meta and Google. So Meta and Google, with fat profits and all of the despicable practices that they have shown, have been heavily subsidized since the Harper government to today, over $1 billion a year. So that is something, obviously, that has influenced the market and has led to, in part, to the crisis that we are here experiencing now. I'd like to start with my questions of Madame Benavides. Thank you very much for your testimony. It's chilling what you're saying. And the first part of what you said that I believe it's important to follow up on is the rise in hate. As you pointed out, the Center for Countering Digital Hate has pointed to Meta and X contributing to what the Anti-Defamation League and the Southern Poverty Law Center have called the pipeline of hate. We've seen a rise in anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, homophobia, transphobia, misogyny, racism, racist attacks that we've seen right across North America, all provoked by Meta's secret algorithms that attempt to foster and provide through that what the Center for Countering Digital Hate calls malgorithms, helping to provoke that rise in far-right extremism. And we've certainly seen last year every single ideologically motivated mass killing in North America was caused by the far right. So I wanted to ask you, Madame Benavides, what should governments be doing to counter this pipeline of hate that is contributing in real-world killings as a result of the hate that is being fostered online by these algorithms and by deliberate policies that help to stoke engagement by stoking hate in all of its toxic forms?
Thank you so much. Excellent to note that the platforms alone do not bear responsibility for content moderation. And I believe it's important to elevate where government interventions can blunt many of the harms detailed in my own comments as well as those just provided. A few calls that Free Press is making, much of it centering on the use of and extraction of our data. I'll give you 5 core values and principles that we are fighting for. One is that regulators codify reforms to minimize data that companies collect and retain, to protect against discriminatory targeting of users, as I mentioned before, with tailored content and advertising. Number 2 is to ban algorithmic discrimination by platforms and other internet services that use AI tools to target users. The third is to require regular platform transparency and disclosure reports on a number of things. That includes content virality reports, the results of AI decision-making tools, and then the visibility and takedowns of political ads. These reports should be accessible across all languages. We know that there are gross asymmetries when it comes to moderation by platforms in non-English languages. 4, develop a private civil right of action for violations that flow from platforms' use of our personal data. And then finally, leverage other actions and authorities that your government has at your disposal. In the United States, we believe that leveraging agency and White House authority is critical. There is a need for better coordination, not less. When we cordon off communication between tech companies and other sectors, we get the environment we are now in. And so our final recommendation is to really elevate the ways that we collaborate and coordinate to share information, not block off access. Thank you.
Thank you. As a follow-up question, we've heard about the Meta donation to Harvard that has the allegations are that led to a crackdown on disinformation research at Harvard University. You point to the fact that Meta's new policies allow for clearly false political ads in the United States. The fear, of course, we saw the myth around the election being stolen, leading to a physical attack on Capitol Hill, and the same individuals involved in that now want the unfettered access to people's homes right across the United States with political ads that are clearly false. We have seen the role of the Russian disinformation machine, the Internet Research Bureau, both in the election of Trump back in 2016, but also in the Brexit referendum, a very clear interference that led to a profound political decision with political consequences. Are you concerned about all of these impacts on our democratic life and on our ability to make decisions in a free country?
You have a very short space in which to answer, Ms. Benavides. Thank you.
Thank you, Madame. There are dangerous real-world consequences when companies retreat from their previous commitments, and this relationship as content moves from online discourse to the offline world. There's ample evidence now that we as human beings are informed and motivated by what we see online. And as we see companies doing less to protect users, we know that bad actors will exploit those openings and network vulnerabilities. We've seen it over the last 2 months regarding the Middle East and that conflict. And so I believe that ultimately platform integrity leaves democracy in the balance. We have over 40 elections coming up next year.
I'm sorry, you can expand on that later on. I'm going to go now to a 5-minute round. And once again, I would like to warn everyone that 5 minutes includes the question and answer. And so we begin with the Conservatives. Kevin Moore. Kevin, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think we've lost a generation of news followers. You know, in newsrooms, they don't think what the consumer wants. You know, time shifting. We can't have the news other than 6 o'clock or 11 o'clock. And they saw viewers coast to coast saying, I want to watch news when I have the time. And that's why the platforms won out. That's why websites have won out. I look at the news industry. They're still back in the 50s. They haven't grasped what the consumer and eyeballs want. And, you know, when I look at the news media in the United States and even in Canada, you know, Mr. Spear, you made a good point about donations, because PBS television, even though they're in the United States, they get thousands of dollars from Canadian viewers. Why? Because we watch it, and when they have a telethon, I see hundreds of people in my community donate to PBS. Maybe that's the model that we need for public television, not only in the United States, but here in Canada with the CBC.
I would just say 2 things in response, Ms. Chair. First of all, I'm slightly more optimistic that the industry is transforming itself in a way that connects it more closely to its audience. And I think that extends from smaller organizations like the Hub to some of the major legacy players who may have moved slowly in this direction, but are now moving in it. And I think it's a healthy one. A connection between journalism and audience is fundamental to the future of the industry. The second thing I would say is, in terms of different financial models, I think that there are extraordinary opportunities to build value for readers and listeners and so on and to start to restore the expectation that news is something that people ought to pay for. I think one of the other witnesses observed earlier that one of the challenges that the sector has faced is about 20 years ago or so, it put its content online mostly for free. And that socialized, as you say, I think a generation of readers and listeners to think that news was valueless. And I think the way to solve for that, and we're seeing this play out in Canada and in the United States, from legacy players to smaller players, is starting to restore that relationship with the audience and creating the conditions, I think, for people to once again pay for news. And I think that's a healthy development. And ultimately, it seems to me that the role of public policy is to support that process rather than shape it in a direction that, as I said earlier, we can't possibly know where it's going to end up and what types of models are ultimately going to be successful.
I think you made a very good point. The firewalls that news organizations put up, like you said, 20 years ago didn't work, and then they gave their product away for free. So journalism is worthless. And so how do you look at that model now? And I'm not going to pay for the Boston Globe. I'm not going to pay for the New York Times because I'll get it somewhere for free. And that's the issue I think consumers are facing themselves. When they go to the paywalls, they'll say, well, you know what, I'll find it somewhere else because someone will post it and I'll steal the information from there.
Well, if that is a pernicious problem in the market, then I think there'll be possibly a role for public policy, obviously a role for the players to address it. But I find myself more optimistic. I subscribe to multiple outlets precisely because I want to read what they're producing. And I think that's the increasing news consumption habit of a lot of people in the digital age. And to go back to a conversation we were having earlier, one way I think to incentivize or encourage that type of news consumption behavior would be to increase the subscription tax credit, which is presently non-refundable. So that is to say, if you're not paying taxes, you're not eligible to claim it. And it's limited to 15%. France has a subscription tax credit that is refundable and as much as 50%. And it's mostly seamless for the subscriber. In fact, the media player is responsible for claiming the credit with the government. So I think there are ways for public policy to, in effect, continue to nudge in the direction of a stronger relationship between news outlets and audiences. I think that's the direction where the sector is broadly headed, and one way that public policy can support it.
With you. I think podcasts are going to take over from radio stations. I think you're right. When you come across a podcast that you like, you do subscribe. And I think that is one of the new emerging players that we're seeing in the marketplace, where podcasts right now kind of generate more listeners than they do radio stations. So, and it's consumer choice. I think that's the other one that people have forgotten. The consumer will decide what they want to hear or listen to, and that will drive the market where it needs to go.
And I would just say there are inherent trade-offs to everything we're talking about. I think the other witnesses raised serious challenges that policymakers in Canada and elsewhere ought to focus on. There are trade-offs in all of the choices before us. But one of the upsides that I wouldn't want to go under explored or under considered is the democratization of news that has occurred over the past 20 years. Podcasts, the barrier to entry for podcasts essentially is your iPhone. Everyone can be a podcaster. And of course, then it's up to consumers to make judgments about what's reliable and what can be trusted and so on. But that has given voice to so many people who, in the traditional era of a concentrated news media, were closed out from the public conversation.
Mr. Spears, I'm sorry, you're about a minute over time, so can we just, I'm going to ask you to end there, and you could probably answer it in the other round of questions. Thank you. Now I'm going to go to the Liberals. Mr. Nur Mohammed. For 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And thank you to the witnesses for being here. I've been fascinated by a lot of what I've heard because I think there's so much for us to really dig into here. And Ms. Benavides, you talked a lot about, and actually Mr. Julian, when he was asking you, I don't know if he misspoke or if it was intentional, but he used the word algorithm, but it sounded like malgorithm, and I wonder if that's what we need to start calling them. Yes. Malgorithm. It's a great term. It's a great term. But it was intentional? It was great.
Point of order, Madam Chair. That was from testimony from Mr. Ahmed.
Right. It's fantastic. I should restart using that word. But when you look at the use of these algorithms as they pump some of this content out, particularly, as Mr. Julian pointed out, the hateful comment, the anti-Semitic comment, the Islamophobic comment, the stuff that really can cause material damage to people. Who tends to benefit from the spread of that misinformation? And when the algorithms on these platforms spread that information, who tends to be the beneficiary politically?
Thank you so much. Well, we know in the most recent, year with Elon Musk taking Twitter over, part of why he has reinstated so many previously banned accounts is to try to build up revenue. And many advertisers who have departed that platform have done so because they've seen that their brand content is featured next to horrific, hateful, white supremacist, neo-Nazi content. So the question of who benefits, I'm not sure. Elon Musk surely has not. And Twitter is now valued at less than half of what he bought it for, actually, over a year ago. There are other benefits, though, and many of the companies are benefiting because of ad revenue for eyeballs in other contexts. So when Meta, realizes that its revenue comes primarily from eyeballs that see incendiary content, they are boosting that type of stuff, pushing for users to see the most controversial content because they know that it will get more attention, more engagement, more likes, more comments, and more shares.
And in your experience, and I'm going to ask the same question to Mr. Peinert, in your experience, is it primarily right-wing content, is it primarily left-wing content? And this question, just to be clear, is not meant to make a political statement, but to really determine whether the platforms are agnostic as to who they decide to rage, or who they decide to kind of exploit, or do you see it on one particular side of the spectrum or the other?
Given many of the opacity problems I've mentioned previously, it's difficult to say with certainty, and certainly across every platform, what content is being boosted more than other. We have anecdotal evidence at best, and that's part of why we continue to call for greater disclosures, greater auditing of what processes are occurring within these companies. But one of the pieces we do know is that far-right and extremist content has been engaged with over 6 times more than other content that is politically neutral. The NYU Ad Observatory, which was kicked off of Facebook for doing this research, found many of those various pieces of evidence and pointed to the way that conservative and far-right content is getting amplified more. There is a current, at least in the United States, effort to recharacterize this attack. And part of what we have to be very careful about is the way that we point to evidence to make sure that we are not making claims we cannot support. So when lawmakers say X or Y type of content is boosted, we have to make sure we have evidence to show. And that's why the precursor is necessary.
Thank you. Mr. Peinert, same question to you. I think this is an important kind of conversation for us to have. And Ms. Benavides mentions that it's about 6 times more that you see the far-right extremist kind of content being pushed. Has that been your experience? How do you see how do you see the notion of the content that is being shared? Do you see it more, again, in the same way, primarily far-right content, very conservative content? What do you see there? Or are you seeing it sort of equally spread across the spectrum?
45 seconds.
I will answer quickly, and Thank you for the question. I would primarily reiterate what Ms. Benavides said, is that I can only speak anecdotally that it seems like far-right content seems to be more proliferated, but I do want to emphasize that from the company's perspective, it's clear that it's primarily driven by algorithms that are simply meant to keep users engaged to the maximum degree possible, and the companies don't appear to care what the political orientation of that content is, so long as they can keep users engaged and to some degree addicted to the platform in order to maximize eyeballs on screen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'll go to Mr. Champoux for the Bloc Québécois for 2.5 minutes, please, Martin.
Madame la Présidente, ça fait plusieurs...
Madam Chair, a few times now, this committee has studied the unfair, dominant position of web giants over the news sector. We've examined this from a number of different angles. News is affected in different ways, through ads, but also through the ways they have to go about journalism. New businesses and new technologies are creating more competition. And what we're seeing is the domination of web giants is forcing Quebec and Canadian news companies to review their budgets, lay people off. We saw this this week with Catherine Tate's announcement at CBC Radio-Canada. So, Madam Chair, I'd like to move the following motion. That, pursuant to Standing Order 1081A, the committee summons Catherine Tate, CEO of CBC Radio-Canada, to testify on the subject of the job cuts announced at CBC Radio-Canada for the year 2024 for a period of 2 hours. That the committee prioritize this motion over all current and future studies and other committee business, so that the committee devote its first meeting at the return from the holiday recess to it. Madam Chair, the clerk has distributed the motion in both official languages.
Oui, c'est fait, Madame la Présidente.
Yes, it has been distributed.
We distribute, please. Pardon?
Can I just seek a point of clarification?
Yes.
Is he, sorry, I just need clarification. Were we given notice? Is he giving notice of the motion or is he moving
No,
the
he's
motion?
moving the motion now because it's within the context of what we're studying.
Okay.
He doesn't have to give 48 hours
Yeah,
notice.
understood. Thank you.
I'd like to have one of those guys. Oh, thank you.
I printed 15, so there should be enough when it comes back.
Could I have one, please? Thanks. You wish to say something?
Yes, just on a point of order. I have no objection to Mr. Champoux moving this, though we do have guests, important witnesses. I still have questions, so I'd like to move for unanimous consent to give him the opportunity to speak after we complete this round, so that he will then be able to move his motion.
Now, I'll ask Mr. Champoux, because if Mr. Champoux says no, we're not going to get unanimous consent.
La dernière fois que j'ai accepté...
The last time I agreed to something like that, we had the discussion and never got to my motion. So, no, this is a very simple motion. I'd like for us to deal with it now. I'm sure all parties will approve it quickly. So I would like us to continue with discussion on my motion.
All right, so I will ask the witnesses to bear with us. Hopefully we can get rid of this very quickly and then get back to you. So if you can just hold with us for a second. Now, so we have a motion on the floor from Mr. Shampoo. I will entertain discussion on the motion. Did your hand go up, Mr. Cotto? No. Is there any discussion on the motion? Shall I call the question? Yes, Mrs. Thomas?
Thank you. So Mr. Shampoo's motion calls for Catherine Tate, the CEO of CBC and Radio Canada, to testify on the job cuts. Now, we know that CBC Radio Canada, we know that Ms. Tate, the head of the CBC Radio Canada, has made the decision to cut 600 jobs. But we also know that when she was pressed during a media interview as to whether or not the executives would receive a bonus, she was not able to determine a definite no. In fact, she seems to very much be leaving that window open, which would imply then that she is okay with cutting 600 media jobs while still giving big bonuses for the top executives of the company. Now, we know that Ms. Tate herself received a $60,000 bonus this last summer. $60,000, that's more than the average salary of a Canadian in this country. So for Ms. Tate to determine that she's going to slash 600 jobs while still being okay with giving, potentially millions of dollars or tens of millions of dollars in bonuses is absolute ludicrous. So I would say not only does Ms. Tate need to come to this committee, but I would also offer an amendment to this motion. And the amendment would read as follows toward the end. So following period of 2 hours, it would state, and the committee report to the House that it calls on the government to instruct the CBC to immediately ban all executive bonuses, period.
May I suggest that that's not an admissible amendment because the government cannot tell the CBC what to do. It's an independent body. Thank you.
C'est ce que j'allais dire. I wish we could.
That was exactly what I was going to say. I would entirely agree with my colleague, and I do think that we should ask these sorts of questions to Ms. Tate. I totally agree with my colleague, but unfortunately we can't dictate terms to CBC Radio-Canada.
Absolutely. Mr. Julian? Since I have decided that the amendment is not admissible, are you speaking to the motion?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. D'abord, j'aimerais dire très clairement.
First, I would like to state clearly that the idea of giving bonuses while at the same time cutting news jobs throughout the country is shocking. So I think it is important that Ms. Tate come before this committee to answer our questions. These cuts are being carried out while at the same time CBC Radio-Canada executives are being given bonuses. That's a massive contradiction. I think everyone can recognize that.
I know with Mr. Polyev, no one at CBC would be working. They want to destroy the entire institution. So I think it's a bit rich for any conservative to say, well, we're concerned about the cuts. They seem to be celebrating the cuts. Tragically, Mr. Polyev's Twitter tweet
yes, Ms. Thomas.
Inappropriate.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I would just ask that the honourable member be respectful at committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Julian. Let's try to minimize the political comment here. So now, anybody else's hand up?
Madam Chair, I still have the floor.
Yeah, go ahead,
yes.
Peter.
So the reality is her coming forward to testify on the cuts to local positions right across the country at the same time as there are executive bonuses for CBC executives, I think is absolutely appropriate. My preference would be her coming as early as next week. But if the committee's consensus is to have that the first meeting when we get back, I'm fine with that, and I'll support this motion.
Yes, because the second part of the motion says that the committee prioritizes motion over all current and future studies so that the committee devote its first meeting as we return to the holiday recess. And because I may remind the committee that you have asked the Minister of Sport to appear, and she's appearing on Tuesday. So now, any further discussion on the motion? We have witnesses, so please recall that it would be nice to get this dealt with. Thank you. Mr. Noor Mohammed.
I'll be very brief. First of all, very much in support of what Mr. Champoux is trying to do here, and especially appreciate the fact that given the Minister of Sport is coming next week, that we're doing this first meeting back so we do not take away that time that we've all been asking for with the Minister of Sport. Look, I agree with Mr. Julian. I think it is, as a former CEO, I cannot possibly imagine having fired employees before Christmas and then contemplated taking a bonus. And I think there are a lot of questions that the CBC needs to be asked by Canadians and indeed by this committee. As everyone in this room well knows, the government does not control the CBC, and therefore we can't tell them what to do. But I think it's very important for us as parliamentarians to ask Ms. Tate those very questions, including questions about the appropriateness of executives contemplating bonuses when she does appear. But again, it is not for government to direct her, but I think it's important for us to ask these difficult questions to her because they're important on behalf of Canadians that they be asked.
Thank you, Mr. Noor Mohammed. And Mr. Waugh?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I laugh when people say they get bonuses. Listen, I've been in the business a long time. Bonuses are giving every year to Bell executives, to Rogers executives, to every executive in this country, in the media. They get bonuses at the end of the year. The difference here is this is a public institution, not a private one. So, you know, if the CBC decides to give bonuses, yeah, we can stand up and all decry that they're getting their bonuses, but this has been going on for decades in this business. This is not new. What really disturbed me, Madam Chair, if you don't mind me saying, is the last time Ms. Tate was here, she knew these cuts were coming. This takes months of preparation, of cutting back 600-700 employees. This just doesn't happen in a week. She knew when she was in this committee that these were coming and at this time. CBC has done this in the past in December, and she knew full well in committee that they were prepared for a massive exodus of news journalists. So that's where this should go. As for bonuses, yes, we're all upset, but this has happened in the business, Madam Chair, for decades.
Thank you very much. Now, if I see no hands up for further discussion, yes, Mrs. Thomas.
Thank you. Okay, so I take the point. Thank you to the members of the committee. I would offer then a different amendment then, if I may. Again, we know that Miss Catherine Tate, the head of the CBC and Radio-Canada, has said that she is slashing 600 jobs from the organization. And we know that she's left the door open to give bonuses to the top executives of the company. I'm hearing from the committee that we all feel that this is inappropriate. And so the the amendment that I would add would be at the end of the motion, and it would read as this: that the committee report to the House, that the committee report to the House, it would be inappropriate. Sorry, 1 second here. It would be inappropriate for the CBC to give bonuses to the executive members.
But it would be, we'll speak to the amendment. It is an admissible amendment, that it would be inappropriate.
Yeah, so it would be inappropriate or imprudent. So maybe we'll go inappropriate for the CBC to issue bonuses to executive members.
Well, actually, okay, we could. I mean, that's a statement. It's because we cannot.
Can I
decide that this is going to happen? As long as we're clear
slightly?
That it's not that we're saying that it is inappropriate.
Absolutely. So,
yeah?
well, okay. So let me just adjust that a little bit more. And the committee report to the House that given these job cuts, comma, it would be inappropriate for the CBC to grant bonuses to executive members.
All right. This is an amendment on the floor. I'd like to see any discussion on the amendment, or shall we vote? Or may I ask the witnesses to leave, because we are now only have 10 minutes left. So I'm very well aware that we have witnesses sitting here who came to speak to us, and we're holding them waiting. Pardon,
Madame la Présidente, juste pour vous faire remarquer.
Madam Chair, I'd just like to note that today's meeting started at 8:22. So really, we have 15 minutes left. I think that we can quickly get through the amendment and the motion, and then there will still be a little bit of time left over to question witnesses.
Mr. Shampoo, I know you think we can quickly. I am yet to see that happen in this committee. So let's decide. How do we have the ability to go over time past 22 minutes?
We have the room until 10:30.
We have the room until 10:30 if the committee is interested, and if the witnesses can stay until 10:30. So, Mrs. Thomas.
I moved the amendment and I wasn't done. So I just
you
wanted
hadn't
to make
finished.
sure that
Sorry.
the floor was
All
coming
right.
back to me.
Oh, okay. All right. Go ahead. Sorry.
Good.
Are you reading it out again?
So I just want to be really clear here. So what this motion does then is it calls for Ms. Tate, the head of the CBC Radio Canada, to come to this committee and to answer our questions. It also asks that we report to the House that it would be imprudent or inappropriate for the CBC to grant bonuses to their top executive members. This is because the head of the CBC, Ms. Tate, made the decision to cut 600 jobs. And if she was then to go forward with giving bonuses to executives, what type of message would that send?
Sorry, that's a debate. Have you finished your amendment? Do I have all the wording of it? Because I don't know. I mean, what I have is what you're saying, and the committee report, because I have to read this into the record so we can do it. I have that the committee report to the House that given the job cuts, that it would be inappropriate of the CBC to grant bonuses to the executives.
Chair, I have a point of order on this. I don't know if it's appropriate before we even do a study to ask to report back to the House. That's something that we do after we do a study. Why in the initial study would we just say that we're going to report to the House? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. That's something you do after you do the study. The whole point of the study is to bring Catherine Tate here and ask her those very questions. And then absolutely, if it makes sense, then we report back to the House what we heard. Why would we report back to the House without hearing any evidence?
Yes. That's an important point taken, Ms. Hefner. Mr. Shield?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think putting it in the motion makes for sure it's going to be reported to the House. We're stating that up front. Right.
Mr. Shields, I will, however, following up on Ms. Hepner, just say to the committee, you will make the decisions, but I would say that, do we know for starters that there are going to be bonuses given? So we cannot presume that this is going to happen, and therefore we're making a recommendation within a motion to do a study, which is kind of, a little backward in terms of how we do work here. So I'm just putting that on the table for people to listen as they vote on the amendment or not. I will still think it's appropriate in some ways to bring forward this amendment. So why don't we vote on it? If you're ready, and unless you have any new points to offer, I think I've read out what Ms. Thomas said, and so may I, Mr. Shields? Yes.
Is it in both languages?
Well, I think is that a motion appropriate, that we make a recommendation? Sub-amendment appropriate?
There's precedence to report to the House based on a motion adopted. Yeah.
Saying it is appropriate to jump the gun on this one. So I'm presenting you with the amendment. Can we speak to the amendment, please, and only the amendment? Mr. Coteau.
Back to your point, Chair, we don't know, what the current plan is. It'd be nice to find out. But perhaps instead of making a conclusion before we hear from the witness, perhaps it could say something like, and maybe MP Thomas will take this as friendly advice, but maybe it says something like to come and speak on the issue of CBC bonuses rather than, just jumping to one conclusion.
Mrs. Thomas, do you have a response to that?
Sure.
I'm trying to get the amendment to be, obviously, I think everyone's in agreement with you, so can we get something that we can all agree with?
I would leave my amendment as is.
You would leave your amendment as it is. So therefore, unless there's any further discussion on the amendment, I wonder if we could call the vote. I'd like the chair to please read out the vote. I'm sorry, the clerk. Thank you. Ms. Henriette, go ahead.
So I can read out the motion as amended, that second paragraph, just so that it's clear. So with the amendment, the motion would read that the committee prioritize this motion over all other current and future studies and other committee business, so that the committee devote its first meeting at the return from the holiday recess to it, and that the committee report to the House that given these job cuts, it would be inappropriate for the CBC to grant bonuses to executive members.
Yes, so now please call the vote. Thank you. Yes, yes, Mr. Mikoto.
An amendment to the motion, then? No. I had my hand up before the vote was being called.
I call the vote. You had spoken, Mr. Koto, and you had ended, so I'm calling the vote.
But the clerk spoke and read the actual motion, the amendment, and I put my hand up, and then you said you're going to call your vote. So my hand was up before you said, let's go to the vote.
I did allow you to speak, but go ahead. Just allow. Otherwise, we're going to be wordsmithing this whole thing. Let's get it moving. Now,
Well,
Mr. Koto, what do you have to say?
I made a suggestion earlier that rather than say to jump to a conclusion, maybe we just direct the clerk to put in the motion rather than the last piece that was added by MP Thomas, that we focus more specifically on inviting Ms. Tate to come to speak on the issue of bonuses.
Ms., you suggested that, and Ms. Thomas said she would leave a motion exactly as it is.
So can I make an amendment,
So if you're
right?
making a sub-amendment, please do so. Can you read it out, please?
Rappel au règlement, Madame la Présidente.
Sorry.
Point of order, Madam Chair. I'm confused about the ruling you just made. You called for a vote. Then the clerk read out the text as amended. I have nothing against Mr. Koto's idea. I think it's a good idea, in fact. But you already called for a vote, and the clerk has already read out the amended motion.
The committee to just go ahead and vote?
Je pose la question, Madame la Présidente. Selon le règlement, je pense...
I'm just asking about the standing orders. Once a vote is called, there's not usually debate.
Was called. Mr. Koto had made this point before the vote was called, so he's making the point after the vote is called now.
From my understanding.
The vote stands. We should call the vote now, please. Because after, excuse me, Mr. Koto, after the clerk was only reading out the motion so that we could vote, I had called the vote.
Point of order.
Yes.
Chair, it was very clear that you allowed me to read my motion, my sub-amendment to the motion. You allowed me to do that, and I started to do it. I finished saying what I said. You said, well, is it written down? And we were at that point. So you allowed me to actually propose a sub-amendment. So I don't understand how we're going backwards now to another point in this meeting process. I would ask if that's the case. Well, I'd like to know how we got to a point where I was allowed to get to a sub-amendment and proposing it, and you asking me to read it, and now we're back to it wasn't allowed. I don't understand that.
The clerk is ruling, because she's keeping tabs of what's going on, she's ruling that in fact we had called for the vote before you made your sub-amendment, and therefore I should allow for the vote to occur. That's the rules, according to the clerk. So we should go for the vote. Thank you.
I think the clerk's trying to say something.
Go ahead, Geneviève.
No, so Don't have anything to.
She's already spoken to me and said we should go to the vote. Thank you. I will call the vote now.
Can I?
If you are going to challenge the chair, Mr. Cotto.
I won't challenge the chair.
All right. So let's go to the vote, please.
Can I ask us if we can suspend for 1 minute?
The vote is to be taken. Let's call the vote, please. Go ahead.
Can I ask that the the amendment be read one more time?
No.
Well, I think that's my right as
It's
a
already
member.
been read.
It's not. I don't see it in writing anywhere.
All right, okay. Please, the clerk can read it, or I will read it. If you look at the second paragraph in the motion, that the committee prioritizes motion over all other current and future studies and other committee business, so that the committee devote its first meeting at the return from the holiday recess to it, and the committee report to the House that given the job cuts, that it would be inappropriate of the CBC to grant bonuses to the executive members. That's what we're voting on, that amendment. So please call the vote.
The vote on the amendment as read by the chair. Mr. Coteau.
Against.
Ms. Dillon.
No.
Ms. Gainey.
No.
Ms. Hefner.
No.
Mr. Noor Mohammed.
No.
Mrs. Thomas. Mr. Waugh.
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas.
Yes.
Mr. Shields.
Yes.
Ms. Goodrich.
Yes.
Mr. Champoux.
En faveur.
Mr. Julian.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay.
So that is 6 yeas, 5 nays.
Did we call the Mrs. Gainey and Mrs. Dillon?
Yes.
We did? Okay. So what's the vote?
6 yeas, 5 nays.
6 yeas, 5 nays, so that the amendment passes. Order, please.
No, we didn't. No, we didn't. No, we didn't. We were going to vote in favor of.
Order, please. The amendment passes. And so we should go on to the amended motion. And I'm not going to read it again because you know what it is, Mr. Champoux.
Madame la Présidente, on a...
Madam Chair, there have been discussions about the amendment. Honestly, I liked Mr. Coteau's idea to include the bonuses in the subjects we would question Ms. Tate about. But you called the vote. It's important to follow the standing orders, and that's exactly what we did. Unfortunately, the motion could have been better worded. That said, the intention is good. That's why I still voted for the amendment. But I would just like to say that it's obvious for all MPs here that it would be inappropriate that bonuses be granted to CBC Radio-Canada executives. I do think the message should have been worded in the way Mr. Coteau wanted, but I think we should get that out there nonetheless. Everyone now understands the motion as amended. As such, I call for another vote.
Thank you. We will vote now for the motion as amended, please. Clerk.
The motion as amended. Mr. Coteau.
In favor.
Ms. Dillon.
Yes.
Ms. Gainey.
Yes.
Ms. Hefner.
Yes.
Mr. Noor Mohammed.
Yes.
Mr. Waugh.
Yes.
Mrs. Thomas.
Yes.
No.
Mr.
Say
Shields.
no, Mr.
No, I said yes.
Okay.
I said yes.
Oh, my God. Mr.
Mr. Shields.
Yes.
Ms. Goodrich.
Yes.
Mr. Champoux.
En faveur.
Mr. Julian.
Yes. We.
11 nays. Yeas.
Unanimously passed by the committee, the motion as amended. Thank you. And now I would like us to go back to...
I thought you just adjourned, Madam Chair.
Sorry, I know. Sorry, I was just...
I took that as adjourning.
I was so anxious to get back to the witnesses.
Yeah, I'm very sorry.
Because we have 10 minutes.
As you know, I have got a bunch of hats, and I have another committee to run to. So
I know. Can you not wait for another 2 minutes? Because you're up next on the 2.5 minutes.
And that's why I asked Mr. Champoux to speak later. But unfortunately, he is...
All right.
Yeah.
Do you not have 2.5 minutes, Mr. Julian?
I need to leave. I would ask to adjourn.
Is there any opposition to adjourning?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Yes, Mrs.
Sorry,
Thomas.
we do have until 10:22, is what you stated earlier, and so we would not be able to move for adjournment without unanimous consent before that time. So I would ask that we use the last 2 minutes wisely.
Thank you very much, Ms. So we will continue with the witnesses, and the next person up for questioning would have been
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I'm not giving away my time.
All right,
I have to stay here as long as
Mr.
we are not
Julian, then,
adjourned.
2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I would ask our witnesses, Mr. Peinart and Mr. Spear, now that they're aware of the over $1 billion that the federal government provides in indirect subsidies, basically we subsidize advertisers to advertise on Meta and Google. Do either of you, given your testimony about the importance of fact-based journalism, do either of you feel it's a good idea for Canada to continue to subsidize to such a massive extent Meta and Google? I'll start with Mr. Peinert.
No, I do not think that is a necessary or good idea given the scale and profitability of this company. Either of these platforms, in fact.
I'm afraid I don't know enough to answer it. It may be that there's a case that's the best means of reaching Canadians with information that the government of Canada wants to communicate, in which case, that the trade-off there may be worth continuing to use those platforms to reach Canadians in the same way that the Hub and others want to reach Canadians.
I would like to move on to Madame Benavides. I appreciate your comments about algorithm transparency, and this is something that has come up both in the U.S. Congress and in Canada. I have a private member's bill C-292 that would force algorithm transparency for platforms. Senator Ed Markey in the U.S. Congress is presenting similar legislation. In fact, his legislation inspired our legislation here. The platforms are opposed because the possibility of liability once those algorithms are exposed is something that they're concerned about, that they might be liable for the kinds of algorithms, the malgorithms that they're promoting that have led to so many incidences of violence. What is your feeling on algorithm transparency and legislation, and do you feel it's important that legislators move forward with this type of legislation?
34 seconds.
It's incredibly important that you move forward with this legislation. Free Press Action endorses Senator Markey's legislation, and we just met with him yesterday regarding the Algorithmic Justice and Online Platform Transparency Act. Companies often will acquiesce under threat of regulation, and we need a first step of understanding what they are doing with their business models, their moderation practices, and more. Thank you.
Thank you. That was 4 seconds left, Peter. So that's good. Now I'm going to go to Mr. Shield for the Conservatives.
Madam Chair, I think we're way past our time.
Well, we have 2 minutes.
It's 20.
Oh, it's 25
20,
after.
yeah.
I can't see the clock very well
Yeah.
from here. Sorry. So you
Motion to adjourn?
Your motion to adjourn. Is there any objection to the motion to adjourn? No? Then this committee is adjourned. I want to thank the witnesses, however, guys, for coming.